We're on.
And we're on. Hello.
What were you drinking?
I was literally water. I'm just Katie going for another debate after facilitating Ali dunking on Matt. Okay, well, welcome to the Katie Helper Show. We have a great show for you guys today. I'm Katie Helper. I look a little goth, and this, of course, is
Nando Villa.
Nando Villa.
Nando Villa.
And welcome to our Wednesday night show. Lot to talk about. What were you gonna say, Nando?
I forgot to record myself.
Oh, that's okay. Just don't worry about it. We're trying to up the quality for you guys.
I'll do that right now.
Okay. I'm also. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay. So, okay. I feel very silenced right now. I don't know about you, Nando.
Why?
Because I cannot tweet right now. Can you?
Yeah, me neither. This is like this is what's called a humble brag, which is like that we're being silenced for being a blue check mark, right?
Yeah, we were, but then we manifested that just now because I just checked and I just tweeted what is going on, and the universe responded. And it looks like I have the power of tweet again.
There you go.
The power of the tweet. Anyway, that's pretty exciting. So why were we? Yeah, is this a humble brag or is this how can we?
It's a total humble brag. It's an absolute humble brag. It's a great humble brag. You know.
Yeah, but it's a humble brag. I mean, I've been verified for a while. You were verified before me, I believe.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I worked at an actual news organization.
Yeah, and I was too much of a threat. Like they had to.
Right.
Twitter had to.
I'm surprised you got
their
blue checked.
Yeah.
You know, you infiltrated Twitter headquarters, and because you're much more hardcore than I am. You know, I'm a bourgeois asshole, whereas you are like an actual kind of revolutionary vanguardist. You know.
Yeah. I'm in the ghetto of living in the slums in the favelas of Western New York.
Yep.
Well, yeah, we have a great show. We have Omar Wasow, who is a political scientist who wrote a very controversial piece about revolutionary tactics, non-revolutionary tactics, violence, non-violence. What does that even mean? Right? We'll get into that. But the piece was it definitely struck a chord, and we'll talk about the timing of it because it was pretty amazing timing. And it was pretty controversial, and it may or may not have resulted in the firing of someone, and that, of course, relates to cancel culture.
Whoa.
Then we'll have Malaika Jabali, who is a writer, a journalist, filmmaker for places like Essence, The Guardian, and we're going to have a debate and also talk about the letter. So last week we talked about the Harper's letter, and then there was a more specific letter written in response to the Harper's letter, and Malaika is one of the signatories. So last week we had on Matt Karp, who signed the Harper's letter, and we did a last-minute debate. I just threw it in there. It was a Matt Karp on Ali Abunimah live, unplanned debate that they both did very well in, and I decided that, though less exciting, it was perhaps more responsible for me to have a debate. A consensual debate. A debate with affirmative consent.
There you go. Oh, there's your mic. I was going to say, like, where's your mic?
I know. Where's the mic? Okay. So, and it's going to be a great chat, and we're going to talk about lots of different things. And I'm okay. How are you, Nando? I feel very stressed right now. I got to let go of this. I got to
do some breathing exercises.
Do some breathing. Find my center. Okay.
You got this.
I got this. You know what it was? I was so triggered by not having my Twitter active, and I felt so silenced. And now that I have it, it's like I feel like I should just be tweeting, and I feel
Twitter
very
did violence towards you by silencing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I was decentered by Twitter, so I know now what it must have felt like in the French Revolution, like with the Great Terror. Like we blue checks really, we really went through it. So Nando, you were saying that you had some fights with some people about the great Noam Chomsky. What happened?
It's probably maybe I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think it was going to be that big of a deal, but I was just getting annoyed by some, younger people, younger leftists kind of talking shit about Noam Chomsky for signing the letter, the famous Harper's letter. And I tweeted out, like, I was like, I find it annoying that all these, like, people are canceling Chomsky when, he's dedicated, what I mean? He's done more for the left than very few people, like, in America, you know what I mean? And, I think it's not to say that he's above criticism or whatever. Right. It's more like do it in a way that recognizes his contributions and his very real, like, if you have some sort of disagreement with him, that's fine, but do it in a way that, like, recognizes that there is some sort of legacy that you have to respect in some way. Like, I think that's important, is to, like, respect the people who've done incredible things and have dedicated their lives, and really, like, Chomsky's just like, he's a saint, in some ways. Like, he's really, like, the purest guy. And the amount of people that respond, like, wake up, dude, Chomsky is trash, or, like, he's funded by the Pentagon because he works for MIT, and I'm like, what? Like, what is this, like, young cohort of, like, left-wing people who are anti-Chomsky? Like, that guy has, like, put himself out there and put himself on the line for 60 years. You know what I mean? Like, he like he exposing the crimes of the United States in Vietnam at that time was, like, an incredibly courageous thing. And I don't know, like, I felt like there wasn't, like, a respect for his legacy. And, like, if you're going to disagree with him, do it in a way that respects and honors that legacy.
Yeah.
And so, instead of, like, being like, bad look. No.
I mean, yeah, I know. It's really funny. Like, wow, Noam, get it together. My favorite is that I'm really disappointed in Chomsky. I'm really disappointed in you. Like, who the hell are you? Go off. But it's like, yeah, and also, like, engage in the ideas. You want to say why you don't like his take? Sure. But, like, this whole dismissal, I'm really over. And Malaika Jabali's probably going to yell at me for this, but that's good. This is a safe space for yelling. I'm just a little bit over, like, the left thinking that it's punching libs back, like, that they're punching center by like denigrating free speech as some kind of bourgeois tool of the powerful, which it is. But that doesn't, like, you don't get to end it there. That's how it's used, but that you don't then dismiss it.
Yeah, I guess I don't see, like, what the counter is, like, that free speech is something that is bad. Like, I don't get what the counter is, like, what the counter argument is, like, especially when they have all the power. You know what I mean? Like, the bad people have all the power, let's say. Right. So who's going to enforce any sort of restriction on speech is the bad people. So, like, right. If I just don't maybe I'm, like, uninformed on this. I don't understand what the counter to it is. Like, why would you be against it if it's, like, especially because we don't have any levers of power, any levers of power right now. Right. So what are we gonna, like? You don't think they're gonna use it to silence us? Like. Yeah. Well, I've heard a very I think problematic argument. Oh my God, we have to drink every time we say problematic, but that they do that to us anyway. But the point is, like, to the extent that we have any power, any voice, like, what. We either get on the bandwagon with that, or I just think, again, it's like we should not let the radical center be the ones who get to own free speech. And I say this time and time again, and I feel like 100%, right? And I feel like I have to make this declaration at the beginning of every time that I bring up cancel culture or free speech, which is that, like, yes, Steven Salaita was fired and that was very bad. I feel like I'm, like, davening or something. And we can also talk about other incidents. And, we could even do, like, a flow chart about what this cancel culture is. But I just feel like it almost becomes like the oppression Olympics, but of cancellation, because it's like, oh, you want to talk about that person losing their job? Well, this person lost their job for the mere crime of tweeting that Israel shouldn't have been bombing Gaza, which is true. Yeah. And yet I think we can call out all of that. And then, we can talk about Barry Weiss later, but yeah. Someone said Nando's just a hipster lib. I mean, well, maybe that's how you present. You hipster lib present. I'm hipster lib presenting. But you, yeah. And I just think that there's Nick Cannon. Tell us about Nick Cannon. Well, Nick Cannon just got fired by Viacom for saying that that black people are the real Jews, and how can you be anti-Semitic when he said something insane about like the Rothschilds and like the
Right.
and then he was like, I no, it's not anti-Semitic. I mean, I'm black, and black people are the real Jews, so therefore
it's almost like a Rachel Dolezal type thing, like to do. I'm not denying that he's a real black Israelite.
Black Israelite, yeah.
I welcome him into the club. Why don't we say that he was being? Here's my idea. Ready? Nick Cannon wasn't an anti-Semite. He was a self-loathing Jew when he talked about the Rothschilds.
Probably, yeah.
That's what the critique should be.
But again, he got fired by Viacom, and the usual suspects of what you call like you said, like the radical center or whatever, who are now kind of positioned themselves as the big free speech defenders. I mean, it showed like their hypocrisy that they would never come out to the defense of someone like Nick Cannon for saying something like that, because that view is outside of their realm of what they consider. The idea that the radical centrists, Andrew Sullivans of the world, Barry Weiss's of the world, are hypocrites is obvious, and they suck. I hate them. They're awful. Right. They're my enemies.
Not much of hipster live now.
Yeah. And again, this is just like the latest in a line of a million different cases, just the one that happened today, that they would never come to the defense of. They don't come to the defense of people who disagree with them on things. That's just, so it's true that they're hypocrites and they suck.
And in some cases, they actually do the bullying and the canceling.
Oh, like Barry
Weiss, Carrie Nelson, Anne-Marie Slaughter. We did a thing on this. Ali Abu Nima led us through this. And of course, Max Blumenthal did something on this too. But someone asked if I was mourning. Katie, are you in mourning over Barry Weiss? I am in mourning. It's so tragic that she had to resign and go somewhere else. And I think she's probably going to start working with Andrew Sullivan somewhere. Let's cancel the Lincoln Project. I'm all for it. I think that they should be canceled. I'm not sure we'll figure it out. Okay. Yeah. Can you guys stop commenting on Nando's looks, unless at least for like every 5 comments about his looks, like you have to say something objectifying about me, or I feel really invisibilized. That's all I'm gonna say. It's true though. Someone did compliment me on my lipstick, which is good. A good look.
Well, someone said I was an inane frat boy. I went to Boston College. They don't allow frats or sororities there, so I was not.
Really?
Yeah, because
but aren't you kind of like a huge frat?
I guess. I mean, the Brotherhood of the Jesuits.
Yeah, that is a big frat. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. It's called the Vatican. I mean, yeah. I'm not jealous, by the way. Anyway, so there's the Chomsky thing. There's a Nick Cannon thing. Thank you for the bookcase compliment. What else? Sorry, I'm really distracted by. I think I need to have a drink or something. Is that terrible?
Why do you have to have a drink? Like, no,
that means I have a problem, right? It means I have a problem.
No, it means you have a problem when you need a drink in the morning.
Oh yeah.
That's when you know you have a problem.
Right. Should I do that thing again? No, I don't need a drink. I just actually need a glass of water. Should I do that terrible thing where I throw it to Nando again?
You're gonna leave me out here with all these people
again,
that hate me.
They love you. What about Nando's voice? Yeah, can I center you, Nando, for a little bit while I get, and I'm going to get water. All right.
Go
guys,
get
ask Nando questions.
Ask me anything and I'll answer.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. I'm in this is like a,
it's
I don't know what, some kind of, all right, I'm shutting off my camera for a second because I don't want to compete with Nando.
All right. Ask away. All right. This is just me and you guys. Solo time. No one will find out. Parents aren't home. We can talk about whatever. So fire away. He has to play guitar. Well, I'm actually not at my house, so I don't have my guitar here, so I can't play guitar. Sorry. Bad points, silly Nando. Damn, I'm sorry. I don't know what points I made that would upset you so much. Have I ever been to Detroit? I have never been to Detroit. No, never been. Been to Michigan. I flew into Detroit, but I never really spent time in Detroit, so it doesn't really count. Is Nando your given name, or is it short for Fernando? It is short for Fernando. Good eye. Yeah. My dad's name is also Fernando, so that's just I go by Nando. I always have. Nando, does it feel intimidating to share the stage with someone as exceptional as Katie? It is intimidating Katie is actually very good on stage. If anyone has seen her live, she's very funny. She's just very witty and very quick, and tells very funny jokes. Nando, how'd you get into this business? Kind of by accident, really. I never thought I would be in this business. I just kind of backed into it. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just kind of started working in media by accident. And I never really think about my career more than one step ahead. Like I just kind of have stumbled into everything that I've ever done. Look at the walls inside the pyramids. Look at the people depicted. I don't know what that means. Where did you go in Michigan, if not Detroit? I went to Ann Arbor. I visited a friend of mine who was studying at Michigan. Went to Ann Arbor, had a great time. I actually went there twice. Nando, how do you Mexican Americans react to your Spaniard culture since you live in California? Generally, they love it. I mean, I find that whenever I travel around Latin America or deal with people in the United States that are from other parts in Latin America, people generally are very, very into Spain and Spanish culture in general. A lot of people have family over there and stuff, so they always tell me oh yeah, my family comes from this place or this town or whatever. So people like it, and people always comment on the accent. They think it's fun to hear a Spanish accent, and they always make fun of the words we say and stuff like that. So it's always good. Do you like the song Fernando by ABBA? Yes, I've gotten that my whole life. Thank you. Did you actually invent peri peri? I wish I did. I would be a bajillionaire if I did, because that sauce is incredible. If you don't know what we're talking about, Nando's peri peri sauce. Look it up. Nando's chicken, incredible. Nando, who is the best Spanish artist? Do you like Dali? I do like Dali. I know that there's a new strain, a new kind of hipster strain that say oh, Dali actually sucked and stuff. And Dali's great. I mean, I like Dali. I've been to his house. His pool is shaped like a cock and balls, which is kind of hilarious. So Dali's great. I like Goya. Goya is my favorite Spanish artist. I don't know. His paintings move me the most. Nando, what is your favorite hot sauce? Nando's peri peri, obviously. Did you enjoy filling in for Michael Brooks last weekend? I very much did. I love that show. It was a lot of fun. Great time.
I mean, actually, he learned it all. I think we know where he learned it all from.
True. Absolutely. And then, So Katie, we talked. We already did it all.
Great. We're all set. All right.
Yeah, we're set.
Bye, guys. Thanks so much for coming to the show. Just kidding. Velasquez is great too. Yeah, Dali had some weird thoughts about politics and about his mom. I don't care. I celebrate that. Celebrate that. It's also because anytime I can respond to someone with your mom, if I were fighting about Franco with Dali, I'd been your mom.
Right.
I do that with people on Twitter, as I think I've done that in real time here.
Yeah.
On this very show.
Yeah.
So what else? I should, let me just open this thing up.
You doing okay? Did you get water? Wine?
I did get water, yeah. I got water and then I turned it into wine. This is gonna be a great chat. I'm telling you. This is probably I'm gonna stop. Okay, Angela, let's talk about this. Angela Davis. Angela Davis encourages people to vote for
Biden,
which is great. She should do it. I just wish, and she's basically making the argument in electoral politics. She's making a harm reduction argument, and it's a totally good argument, and it's a legit argument. I just think that if you think that electoral politics matter, there was a guy in the race who was slightly less carceral than Biden. And I just think it would have been cool if maybe she had endorsed Bernie Sanders during the primary.
Did she not?
No, I don't think she did. If someone wants to check on that, that would be great. But I'm pretty sure that I'm not totally making that up.
I mean, she didn't campaign for him, but I vaguely remember. Her.
Said some nice things about him. I think she also said some he's problematic things about him.
I mean, Michelle Alexander kind of did a similar thing where it was kind of too little too late type of thing, maybe. But
Did she endorse him? Didn't she endorse Bernard?
but like late, like after he was already like done, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, she did go after the Clintons, which I appreciate. I mean, so did I guess Angela Davis, but not with the. Now I sound like one of those assholes who goes after Chomsky. Not with the gusto I would have liked to have seen.
Yeah, I mean, Brad Bloom says like my biggest wish is that people don't BS about Biden being actually good, make the harm reduction argument fine. You know, like I have
That's
seen.
what Cornel West says, yeah.
I have noticed that like you know, like some of the libs like Jon Stewart and stuff are like, you know what, I'm tired of making like this sort of negative case for Biden of it's just like he's better than Trump. I'm actually going to make the affirmative case for Biden. And like he made the case, and like it was like no one believes you, man. We know that you don't actually believe the words that are coming out of your mouth. Like you're just as cynical as anyone else.
Right.
It was really like, it's really sad. I mean, like no one can make the positive case for Biden. Biden's a joke. I mean,
that would be a good challenge. Yeah. So there's and of course, I was going to show the Angela Davis thing, but I can't get to the clip for whatever reason. But she made this point on RT, which I think is great because I think all the slay queen feminists who attack people as Putinists should now be asked about Angela Davis and if they approve of her being a Russian spy. Yeah. What else? Yeah, I think that's good. I think we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. Anything else that you want to talk about, Nando?
No, you're the boss of this show. I talk about what you decide. I don't make the show.
Well, we got the Nick Cannon thing. We got the Angela Davis thing. We did a little bit of cancel culture. Why don't you talk a little bit more? I heard you talking to Anna Kasparian about cancel culture.
I just think it's something that is not. It exists, and it doesn't. It exists on every realm of the political spectrum. You know, like Josh Hawley calling out Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN for saying "fuck you" to him in a private email, and Adrian Wojnarowski got suspended by ESPN. You know what I mean? Like it's something that exists it's something that's endemic in the culture today, whether you're on the left, liberal, center, or right. I think it's driven mostly by social media. I think it encourages that kind of attitude towards people. That sort of it's sort of like a snitching instinct or something. I don't know. So I don't want to make the point that it's like a uniquely left-wing thing. And that other parts of the political spectrum don't have it. They all have it. I think it just exists kind of generally in the culture today, and it's a very real thing, and it sucks, and people hate it. I don't know, like it sucks. Like, it's very unpleasant. It's very, it kind of forces us to see the worst in people rather than like giving people the benefit of the doubt, which I think we should be doing more often. As a society. So again, I want to make the point that I don't think it's like a uniquely left-wing thing, which is what like the Barry Weisses of the world, Andrew Sullivans of the world think. I think that's ridiculous. It exists on the left. It exists in the liberals. The liberals are awful with it. The radical centrists are also do it, and the right wingers also do it. I mean, everyone's kind of doing it. And I think it really is something that there must be some sort of human instinct toward it, but it also is just put into overdrive by social media. Yeah,
I agree. And it's really hard to talk about it, I think, in a way that's doesn't make you sound like you're spoiled or complaining.
Totally. I mean, obviously public people should be able to withstand public criticism. That's part of the game. I mean, you, Katie, went through a horrible thing over the Tara Reid stuff, and I wouldn't, I've told you a million times in private and in public that I admire your bravery and courage, because, I've never had to go through anything like that. I've just never done that. And that was you being canceled by the libs. The libs were doing cancel culture to you. You know what I mean? And they couldn't, And you were courageous and strong enough to withstand it. But that was horrible. Horrible.
And I mean, also I could withstand it because like my job didn't, no one, I mean, people have tried to get me, and yeah, I'm independently non-wealthy.
But like you absolutely would, if you were working for Vox or something, you would have absolutely gotten fired, So.
Yes, probably. Right. Yeah. But it is, I was going to say, well, I got like, people would have loved to have canceled me, and there's like employment cancellation, and then there's like ideological, like Matt Taibbi calls it like the ick factor.
Yeah.
And that's
where you create like an aura around someone, and then people forget kind of why that person is bad, but they know that they're bad.
Feeling. Yeah, exactly. Even I, who thinks that Barry Weiss, I mean, should be taken to, I think Barry Weiss should apologize to Joseph Massad and all the other professors at Columbia who she smeared. I still think that there's a lazy smearing of her, and we don't need to make it lazy. We can actually show the receipts, which Ali Abu Nima did, for instance. And, I that debate between him and Matt Karp on my show last week, I thought was really interesting, because there is a question to grapple with, which is like, Ali was like, would you sign a letter condemning torture that George Bush had signed? And that is, I do think that, like, I think that is something you could say yes because and Chomsky would say yes because I'm against it. But I think the problem is more, it's like symbolic or symptomatic of a certain value system within which it's not embarrassing to have someone like Carrie Nelson, who went after Stephen Salaita, sign it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And this is a critique that I often reject, because it's like, obviously the powerful institutions reflect the power dynamics in society. And so like there is, this intense Islamophobia and stifling of any criticism of Israel is reflected within this letter also. Right.
Yes.
Like someone who it's like Salaita, I don't think would have been, I'm sure, like what they should have done is they should have asked Joseph Massad and Stephen Salaita to sign that letter. Yeah. And I have a theory that Carrie Nelson and Barry Weiss wouldn't have gone on with it.
Yeah. And I think there was a lot of like talk around the Barry Weiss thing about like whether there was like sexism to like the hatred toward her and all this stuff. And I think that I think the thing about Barry Weiss is that she's such a like obvious mediocrity that like seeing her, the New York Times is, we can make fun of it and all that stuff, and we do, and the failing New York Times, and it's, they suck in some ways, but like, it's still like the most important media institution in America, right? It's the most important journalistic institution in America. Right. And the op-ed page is a powerful organ to, influence the affairs that happen in the United States and therefore the world, right? Like Barack Obama said that he read Thomas Friedman, every Thomas Friedman column, you know what I mean? Like it's incredibly valuable real estate.
I was in a cab in Cairo.
Right. Yeah. And, and to see Barry Weiss, like such an obvious mediocrity kind of there in his cushy gig at the op-ed section, I think got under a lot of people's skin. Media were like, that they saw themselves like, I'm a billion times better than her. And how is she there? So I think that's what's going on, because like there's other guys like, Ross Douthat, who I disagree with ideologically, but I don't consider him a mediocrity. He's like an interesting guy and thinker, and he kind of does the work for his columns, actually like reads things to like inform himself and all that crap. And then he's got all these like weird beliefs and stuff that manifest in all kinds of weird ways, but he's not I wouldn't consider him a mediocrity, and like no one's canceling him. You know what I mean?
Right.
For thought crime, right? For like, so I don't know. Like again, these conversations are so fraught, and people get be entrenched in their own camps. But I think that social media is really like just such a, it's been such a net negative for society. I think you can point to like very obvious good things that it does, but that doesn't mean that in totality it's been a net positive. I think that it's probably a net negative on the whole. Yeah,
I agree. And on that, I think what a better transition than to go from that to while social media has done a lot of harm, it hasn't done a lot of harm? Political science. Maybe that's not true, but this person has not done a lot of harm. He's helped heal the world. I'm going to bring in our first guest, Omar Wasow. So here we go. Can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for sitting through the opening Michigas. That Nando and
I love Michigas.
Yeah.
Let me before we get into like the research. Here's an idea that I think speaks to what you were just talking about with social media, which is a term called context collapse.
Okay.
The idea is it's not just social media. It's that we used to have like a private realm that was work, and a private realm that was home, and a private realm that maybe was like your friends at a bar. And in this world of pervasive information technology and everything being recorded, and those worlds collide, right? And so now suddenly, like to your point, right? It's like it's not that there's a thing called cancel culture. There's culture, and cultures enforce boundaries, and suddenly all of the kind of private realms that would have allowed us to have one conversation with our friends and a different one with our boss are all one conversation.
Right.
That's a term that some people who study digital media have developed, context collapse, and that's what we're witnessing. Is that like you can teach at a Catholic school and then get fired for being on vacation drinking a beer and showing that photo on your Facebook page.
Right.
And like, for example, like no one's private text messages, every single text message they have ever sent would stand up to scrutiny.
Oh my God,
not a single person.
Ours
would get canceled in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
But I remember there's an example of a few years ago, a reporter at ESPN, a woman, I forgot her name, I could look it up, but a reporter at ESPN got caught on camera because her car got towed, and she went to the towing company, and towing companies are this whole awful thing in which like these private companies that can basically are doing this public function and then basically milking the public. They make you pay in cash because it's all kind of under it's a horrible thing, and it's a horrible experience for anyone to get their car towed. And this woman got her car towed, and then she showed up at the towing company, and she did not react well and said some awful things. And then she got fired or suspended. I don't even remember the details, but like it's because like it was caught on camera and then went viral, crazy viral in what you're talking about, this kind of private moment that kind of was immediately meshed with the public realm that, if she knew that she was being watched by millions of people, she wouldn't have done that. And it was honestly like maybe it was her worst moment ever. Maybe
was it like a Mel Gibson type of thing? Was it like
it wasn't, no, it was nowhere near as bad.
Was
and it
like
wasn't
she just an asshole, or was it like problematic?
She was an asshole. She was an asshole, and she was like, she was making fun of like she was not making fun of, she was like talking shit about the tow person for being like uneducated or something. You know what I mean? Okay. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was mean, and she was being mean, and she was trying to be mean to the person because they had just towed her car, and she was just like having this bad, and who knows what the hell was going on in her, you know what I mean? Like, so like, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like this moment that before would have been just kept in the private realm, and you behave kind of differently in the private realm, that all of a sudden became very public.
Right. Yeah. And Omar, you are a someone who you created Black Planet, right?
Yeah.
So you're someone who's written a lot about technology and social media, and some viewers may be too young to know what that is.
Yeah, well, it's funny, right? So we founded what became the largest Black social network called Black Planet in 1999. And then Kanye West, of all people, rapped about it in, I think it was the album College Dropout. People were joking today that he should come out with a new album, Electoral College Dropout. Yeah. And but we thought, okay, like, if Kanye's rapping about Black Planet, we have made it. That was kind of the peak. That was about 2005. It was sort of instead of him marking our ascent, that was the peak, and it was downhill from there.
Right.
But yeah, so I've been thinking about social media all my life, going back to hanging out in what were called bulletin board services as a teenager. So we, some of what's happening now has been a part of nerd culture for a long time, which is that, like your life is being documented and recorded. And at the same time, to kind of talk about the other stuff I work on, right, that everybody has a video camera in their pocket is also what made this last month possible, right? Darnella Frazier, 17-year-old teenager with her cell phone, documents what might have been a private moment of Officer Chauvin killing George Floyd, and sits with that moment for all 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and that becomes that changes our politics, right? So it's in some cases, the degree to which our private moments are being documented can be quite awful, but in other moments, it's a kind of bearing witness that can be quite transformative.
Right. I mean, and that should be public, right? That's one of the differences, is that this is a powerful, an officer of the law, power of arrest, and so yes, he could. Of course, he'd want it to be private, but.
Well, but it speaks to this like nature that there's good things and bad things about it,
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But part of what's so shocking about that video, I mean, just to kind of sit with it for a second, is you'd think. I mean, part of why it's so wild is that he knows he's being videotaped.
Yeah.
And
he doesn't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care. It's like there's a kind of sociopathic callousness where it's like he's not adjusting at all, which tells us how routine this is, and how as has been shown later, this is part of a pattern of abuse for him.
Right.
And so, but we would not, to make one more jump. There's for me that moment of Darnella Fraser's video echoes the work that Mamie Till, the mother of Emmett Till, did to make visible this brutal killing of her son. And we know about Emmett Till being lynched, but we don't know as much about how she did all of this work behind the scenes to make that visible. And there's this quote that I love from her, which is, she said, "Let the world see what I have seen." And that's to your point, Nando. That's some of the potentially beneficial aspects of the way these media work, is that you can post that video at 2 a.m. on Facebook, and suddenly the Minneapolis Police Department is accountable.
Yeah, and you're referring to the open casket, right, of Emmett Till.
Yeah, so just to dive into that for 30 seconds, right? That what she does. So Emmett Till is brutally murdered in the South, visiting relatives. The undertakers in the South don't want to let the body come to Chicago, where Mamie Till, where he lives. She fights tooth and nail to get the body out of the South. The undertakers make a deal. You can't have an open casket funeral. She fights that. She arranges to have an open casket funeral. She brings media in. The South accuses her of engaging in propaganda, which at some level it is. It's propaganda against Jim Crow. And it becomes an international story. And so she does this, this kind of act of alchemy to turn this brutal, unspeakable suffering into a kind of not gold in the sense of it's a positive thing, but something really powerful in social change. And so that's I think what's that for me is kind of a model of what is possible in a certain kind of protest, where even under brutal circumstances, it's possible to kind of flip the script and turn suffering into power.
Yeah. Well, speaking of power, we're bringing in our next guest, and I'm really excited for everyone to meet her and for all of us to have a chat. Let us welcome into the show the wonderful journalist, writer, and activist, Malaika Jabali. Hi, Malaika.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Omar. I had a Black Planet page.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, my username was Hot Tamale 86.
Wow.
Oh my God.
I was doing the absolute most.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How were the responses?
You said what?
Oh, how were the responses? Did you have any chemistry with anyone?
Oh, I mean, I just use it to talk to someone that I used to talk to who was like in another state. I already had a boo, and we just communicated on Black Planet.
Oh,
Nice.
okay, got it. Oh, that's cool. That was because
It's like pre-text message era. Pre-text message era.
It was just like Facebook. Omar really created Facebook.
There you go.
wow.
It really was. Like, that's what we used for years, and not that long ago.
Right. I was just gonna. Yeah. No, please.
Part of what our goal was with Black Planet was to kind of people don't remember anymore, but the dominant story of Black folk and technology in the late 90s and early 2000s was the digital divide. And it's like all anybody could talk about how Black folk were falling behind. And so what we wanted to do was make a social network that sort of helped excite a generation of young folk to come online, and it ended up being adults and older folk too. But at the point that we had 3 million users a month, you couldn't talk about how Black folk are not embracing technology. And so I'm sure you're Malaika that was an on-ramp for you too.
Yeah, all my friends were on it.
Malaika, can you raise your volume at all? Or
are your headphone? Are you wearing your headphones?
I'm not. Should I get closer, maybe?
yeah, or do you have headphones? Would that help? You guys, we're talking about technology, and look at this.
I know.
Omar once again is helping amplify your voice.
I have a silly
plug
iPad,
in.
so it has to be charged.
Got it.
The same.
Okay.
Back.
Okay. Got it.
That's not my technology problem. That's Apple's.
That is very true. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll try to raise it in post or something. So anything, I mean, I would love to get into the article and to the debate, but we can also keep talking about this, Black Planet, anything else that you guys want to talk about. I'm being such a weird non-committal host right now. I'm
you're the boss. You gotta tell us what to do.
I'm not feeling like lady bossish at all. Maybe I can raise it on my end. No, I can't. Sorry, someone just suggested this. Well, let's just get in. Let's get into it, and then we can go back and forth. And this is not like a particularly contentious debate. I don't think it's an exchange. And I'm going to do that screen share thing. And let's talk about, oh my God. Have you guys ever been on Democracy Now? Omar, you have been, right?
A long time ago.
Yeah. So you may remember talk about, that's what Amy Goodman does, which is a great way to, it's just a great opening. So talk about your piece. So this is a piece that Omar wrote. And I would love for you to kind of just tell listeners and viewers about the process. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, Malaika. But tell us how this piece was born.
Sure. So let me give a quick summary of just the long journey of to publication, and also just a quick summary of the results. So I started this, I mean, this begins really for me as a teenager, where I was a child of the civil rights movement. My father went to Mississippi to register voters in the same cohort of folks like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, who were murdered registering voters in Mississippi. And so there was this moment, a high point in the mid 60s of like these incredible victories for the civil rights movement. And then when I was coming of age in New York in the 80s, it was a moment where kind of the rhetoric had shifted from civil rights to tough on crime. And I was trying to understand how did we go from civil rights to mass incarceration, and basically left Black Planet in 2005, went and pursued a PhD in African American studies. And as a part of that was really trying to understand the origins of law and order politics. And that led me to looking at a moment in the late 60s and early 70s where, here's the puzzle, right? So Goldwater runs in 1964 on Law and Order, and he loses massively. Civil Rights Act is passed in 1964, so you have a really sharp choice between civil rights and Law and Order loses. In 1968, Hubert Humphrey is running for president. He is the lead author of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and Nixon wins. Nixon's running on Law and Order, right? So in that matchup, Law and Order wins. So I'm trying to understand what happened between 1964 and 1968 that the public shifted in part towards more of a taste for this punitive criminal justice policy. And what I found is that at least part of what was moving public opinion, what was going on the ground with protests that included protester-initiated violence. And so kind of driving in now to some of the main findings, the broad story I find is that if you look at the civil rights movement in the 1960s, in the early part of the 1960s, protesters were able to very strategically, essentially tell their story through the media. And that sometimes meant a nonviolent protest like the March on Washington. It sometimes meant a very strategic kind of protest where they made themselves the target of violence by vigilantes in the state, like at Selma. And that the media coverage from those events, I collected 275,000 headlines, and I found a nonviolent protest today. And to be clear, nonviolent could mean protesters are engaging in a direct action that's peaceful, but they are the object of state violence. A nonviolent protest today produced a headline tomorrow that mentioned civil rights, and public opinion followed that. So there's polling that shows public concern about civil rights becomes the most important problem in America right after the March on Washington. Happens again, big spike in concern about civil rights right after Selma. the Bloody Sunday marches in Selma. And within a year of both of those incidents, we get landmark civil rights legislation. In the later part of the 1960s, and I'm going to wrap here, we see more aggressive resistance to white supremacy. So protesters engage in, use violent tactics in opposition to police violence and state violence. And then the media coverage tends to focus a lot more on crime and riots. And when the coverage focuses on crime and riots, public opinion shifts to a concern about crime, about riots. And we see that the tactics on the ground driving media coverage, driving public opinion. And I show, and I won't go into the details of that just yet, but I show statistically that it's very likely that what was happening on the ground is in fact influencing enough swing voters to move from the Civil Rights Coalition into the Law and Order Coalition, right? So you guys were talking earlier about, Bernie versus Biden and Biden versus, Trump. And I think in a way we focus too much attention, and this has been one of the critiques of my paper, on an individual presidential candidate. And I think that misses that the individual who's the president is part of a coalition. And so, if Biden wins and Mitch McConnell is still in the Senate, you don't have a governing coalition, right? And so the point is, how much of your governing coalition can you get into power? And losing the presidency is a really important part of that. And so when Humphrey loses to Nixon, the Civil Rights Coalition is out of power in a very profound way. And that for me is entirely contrary to many of the core goals of the protesters. So that's what the paper was trying to look at, is what kinds of tactics were most effective for protesters.
And just for a quick context thing, and then Nando go, but I just want, when did you start working on this paper? Just so people have a sense.
So that's right. I kind of skipped over that. So I started working on this in 2005. It didn't get published until just a couple of days by coincidence before the brutal killing of George Floyd. So I've been working on this for years. It had been rejected. It was a real
15 years?
Yeah. No,
that's holy moly. What have you been doing that whole time?
Yeah. Well, even my wife was sort of like, come on, man.
This is like your apocalypse now, like it's like you're in the jungle painting on your face. It's like, I will publish this paper.
It's, academic publishing is it's really tough. And so it's got rejected multiple times. I had findings, some of these findings I had 10 years ago, but people said, well, I don't believe this part, I don't believe that part. So I went and collected more data and tried to show more of what's going on. So, I'm grateful, incredibly grateful that it ultimately did get published and in a leading journal.
Yeah.
Forgive me, I haven't read the paper. I did not, I was not, but I just read a book on like, chaos and COINTELPRO and all that stuff. How did you how much of a role did like agent provocateurs and stuff like that have in this kind of turn that you saw, or at all?
Yeah.
Or was that like kind of overhyped, or I don't know?
I think it's not overhyped. I mean, so let me address one other kind of question that's come up about the work that for which COINTELPRO and other kinds of state repression are an important part of it. So this is an academic paper which I'm trying to squeeze as much as I can into 12,000 words. And so I just sort of say, assume white supremacy, assume a discriminatory state, assume media that is biased, assume extra-legal use of force by the majority. And that's unsatisfying to a lot of folks who want to say, no, you can't just kind of say assume white supremacy and a dominant group that is engaging in excess repression. But that's not the heart of the debate for me. My question is, given things like COINTELPRO, given a media that's not paying attention to the concerns of Black folk, what do you do, right? And it's not just for African Americans. It's like, ACT UP faced this in the 80s. Disabled activists with ADAPT have faced this. Groups around the world face this question. So coming back to the heart of your question, COINTELPRO is absolutely engaging in, intense repression against African American activists. And there certainly are cases where there is, instigation of conflict between different groups. You saw that in the Black Power movement.
Yeah.
Coordinated efforts to try and get groups to attack each other violently. The kinds of events I'm looking at are fairly large events. And so in that kind of situation, killing of Fred Hampton isn't in these data, because that's absolutely an important thing in Black history, but it's not a riot or a violent resistance or it just doesn't show up as a protest. There are other kinds of events where it's the scale of it is such that if you're talking about something like the Watts uprising, there are estimated 3,000 incidents of arson, and I've not seen any evidence that that is the kind of thing that's being driven by provocateurs. Certainly the state's ongoing repression is provocative. Certainly the ways in which the state engages in brutal responses is provocative. But again and again, one of the core narratives of these eras is that they're outside agitators doing this. And I think that is as we saw in Minneapolis, often a kind of magical thinking that wants to say, no, the people in our town aren't this angry, and actually they are.
Yeah. Malaika, that's something I've seen you write about on Twitter, and this, you and I have joked about the kind of it's the Russians narrative that's been used to kind of silence and delegitimize actual Black politics and Black organizing. What are your thoughts on how to talk about this discussion? I feel like it's actually, there's like kind of a meta discussion, right? It's like, what words do we use? Violence, nonviolence, is property destruction, vandalism. What are your thoughts?
I want to first thank Omar, because I think that this is really important and fascinating work and very useful. I'm a big fan of data. I think it's important to be able to look at anecdotes as a journalist. It's important to tell stories, look at anecdotes, but also look at trends over time. And so what he's reporting and what he's researching, I think, comports with what a lot of people think, which is precisely why Martin Luther King and other non-violent protesters and Black freedom fighters use that strategy, because they assumed that it would get the media on their side, that it would get white public opinion on their side, and they'd be able to push for necessary legislative reforms. And so obviously that he's done the research, and we can see it very clearly that it has merit. I was really drawn to his chart where he shows public opinion 1964 go up, where the most important opinion to them was these civil rights issues. And so I think that's really incredible to see. I think one thing, I would challenge several things. One being that when we talk about first the idea of violent versus nonviolence, I think we should be thinking about peaceful versus non-peaceful methods. Because to start off with, what are we calling violence? Is burning down stores where there was repression and violence? Is burning down a police department violence? Why are we using this lexicon to talk about really frustrated communities that are, for the most part, inflicting property damage? So why are we calling that violence? So I would just push back on that framing. And then I would also say that violence is effective, and it's the white violence that contrasts non-peaceful protesters. So yes, he presented trends where there was more empathy for the nonviolent protest movement. But that empathy was drawn because of the stark contrast that you saw of police violence, of police repression. You didn't see that with the arsonists and the non-peaceful protesters in Watts or Detroit or Newark or the over 100 cities where that happened. The police violence wasn't filmed, the police violence wasn't reported, and those were the things that spawned those those non-peaceful protests. But it was the capturing of white violence on Black communities that is what got people up in arms. And I'd argue that that is a similar trend that we're seeing today, where although we saw arson and we saw the Minneapolis police precinct that employed the officer who killed him, Derek Chauvin, that killed George Floyd, even though that police precinct was, went into flames, I caution us from extrapolating things that happened in 1968 to 2020, because we're in different circumstances. So despite all the, non-peaceful protests, people are still saying this is a big problem, and it's spawning Black Lives Matter protests all over the country and all over the world. So I think empathy can be drawn from a variety of places. And even though we had these non-peaceful protests, you also had a white police officer on camera kneeing somebody for 9 minutes. And I think that's where the empathy is drawn, because you see that contrast so starkly.
So let me say also thank you for engaging with the work and for the kind words at the outset. And I am, I'm, even when folks have much harsher things to say than Malaika did, I am grateful for anybody to have engaged with the work, and I learn from the kind of feedback I get. And so, let me also say and thank you both, Katie and Nando, for the opportunity to have this conversation with your audiences. And so, let me begin with a couple of things, right? So, one is the question about how do we define violence, and I think there are a variety of kind of details to that, right? So let me give a technical answer, which is not entirely satisfying, but I'm a social scientist, so let me just sort of say, like, for 50 years, people have used a standard, which is there significant property damage, injury, or death, right? And that's kind of the core of what goes into defining a violent protest. And so we could have a debate about whether property damage is equivalent to, injury is equivalent to death, but sociologists going back to the mid 60s have used this as a framework, and I'm not challenging it, right? So
Twitter canceling our blue check marks is not violence.
That's right, and also
I felt it was violence toward me to be silenced that way.
There are quotes that say language can be violence, and that wouldn't count either here. And there also are cases that I think are complicated if the Black Panthers go to the State House armed, much like the folks in, was it Wisconsin, where there was like a kind of militia that shows up at the State House armed. It's nonviolent in the sense that no one's injured, no property damage, no death, but there's an implied threat of violence, and so that's a kind of gray case too. So I'm not trying to say this is like a simple a story, but fundamentally, just because it's hard to distinguish between night and day doesn't mean we call everything dusk, right? So we've got to have some working model for kind of coding things in data, and significant property damage, injury, or death is what's been used. Let me try to speak more to the spirit, though, of what Malaika said.
Can I just, sorry, before you, not to cut off the spirit, but that's the definition used by political scientists. You're saying significant property damage and death and harm?
Injury or death, yeah, right. So in some events, there's arson. In some events, somebody gets run over by a car. In some events, a bunch of people are injured. And so, how you weight those may, different people will put different weights on those. But that, if some of that is happening, it gets counted as a violent protest. Similarly, it's important to think about state violence, right? There, in the analysis I do, I look at there's sort of a 3-level measure of police violence, where there's kind of routine policing, use of physical force, and then a category called tear gas and other equipment, right? That's sort of more extreme. And broadly, I think, as much as I'm sympathetic to clearly we can rebuild a building, we cannot bring a life back. What that misses is kind of 2 dimensions of, I think, what often goes on in a protest, right? So some people are in a protest to express themselves, and that anger and rage and mourning may manifest in, burning down a building. And we can sympathize and even think that's a legitimate response to white supremacy. But a lot of other people are at the protest to try and persuade people to change, policy, or to make, or try to fight racial inequality. And if your goal is persuasion, then you have to think about, well, what are the people who we're trying to persuade going to say or think, right? And that's a different kind of model, and one of them really has to center the observer, not the person at the protest. And that's complicated, and those things are in tension. But when we see something like a building that was going to be 189 homes for people who are homeless and low income going up in flames, that is a less sympathetic portrayal of the cause than one where we see, by contrast, a 75-year-old man in Buffalo knocked back and bleeding out of his ears, right? And so what I think we see in the 60s that's still true today, and I think Malaika, it makes a very good point. There's a lot of important differences, but I think there's a core thing that continues to be true, which is images can be exceedingly powerful at defining a movement. and that protesters on the ground actually have a lot of power to construct images that can shape the public dialogue. And so the way John Lewis talks about this is they staged protests to dramatize injustice, right? So he's using this language literally of theater, staging, and also dramatizing to try and put their issue in the national conversation. And to the credit of what I think violence helps draw media attention. So I think it is true that burning the police station kind of made everybody in America kind of look up and pay more attention. But I think it's also probably, my assumption is if we'd had a month of that, people would not be talking about civil rights, they would be talking about crime. And because there was a transition to a massive, almost unprecedented wave of nonviolent protest, combined with remarkable, more than 600 videos of police engaging in excess repression, that the story has centered injustice, has centered police violence, and has not focused on these kind of crime scripts in the media.
Malaika, I have stuff in response to that, but I want to give you the chance to. Do you want to?
Yes, I think those are absolutely fair assessments. Again, I go back to what the tactics were of the civil rights movements to begin with, and it was to be able to glean empathy from the average white person who might go to the polls and run and vote for a president. I think we also have to I feel like a few things are being conflated here. One is talking about violence as a strategy and a tactic. And the problem is that a lot of the quote unquote violence and non-peaceful protests that we're seeing isn't necessarily strategized.
Right.
And so in Omar's conclusion, he talks about, kind of frames Malcolm X's like nationalist paradigm versus those of nonviolent protesters. And Malcolm X died 4 years before the 1968 and 1968 uprisings. And so he wasn't strategizing those uprisings. Those uprisings came from everyday people. And so if we are centering kind of this this idea about who is being violent versus who isn't on the subjects of this, on the people who are experiencing the pain and not the power that creates the pain, then I think we lose something there. Because instead of saying it's the frustration and the economic oppression of everyday people that led to their protests and not just them being violent, if we don't look at that frustration that undergirds that, if we don't look at the economic oppression of them that undergirds that frustration, then we're focusing on the victims of the problem and we're looking at them as perpetrators. And so you didn't have just, even if you look at this movement right now, people aren't strategizing. You're not having Malcolm X level figures going out and saying, let's burn down the Minneapolis Police Department. These are just regular people who are sick of experiencing the worst economic and racial inequality in the country, because that's what Black Minnesotans are experiencing. And if you talk to people on the ground, as I have as a reporter, and you ask them, well, what started this? What's in Milwaukee, for instance, what started this? It wasn't some community organizer who was strategizing, because they want legitimacy. A lot of them are getting funding. They don't want to lose their funding and their nonprofit status. It's just regular people on the street who are mad, who are angry. They don't have any other way to express it. So I don't think we can conflate this idea of a nationalist strategy with non-peaceful protests, because a lot of those non-peaceful protesters aren't strategizing. They're just oppressed.
So let me agree with much of what you said, right? I agree that a lot of the protests that escalate to violence, it's everyday folk. But I reject a core part of, I think, the way that story goes, which is that it deprives those individuals of agency. It sort of says they don't have a choice about what they do. And so I was rereading the Frederick Douglass, what to the slave is the 4th of July. And he has this very subtle definition of what it means to be thought of as human, right? He says to treat Black people as human is to consider them moral, intellectual, and responsible. And that for me is like a really important intervention, right? That what I see a lot of folks doing is saying, I want to concede the morality of what people are doing on the street. I want to concede the logic of what they're doing on the street. But I don't want to treat them as responsible agents who have the ability to make choices and decide to do things that may have consequences. And so I want to treat every one of those folk on the ground as an activist who is informed by ideas about what makes change. And to be clear, you're absolutely right. Malcolm X was not alive, in 1968, but his book was enormously influential, right? And so the ideas that someone like Stokely Carmichael, Stokely Carmichael makes this transition from being part of, a more nonviolent arm of the civil rights movement to a more aggressive, like let's engage in self-violence as a form of self-defense wing. And he's influenced by the autobiography of Malcolm X. So I think ideas matter, right? The intellectual component of moral, intellectual, and responsible matter. And I think the responsible part matters. And I 100% agree with you that we need to make sure we're always acknowledging that there is a kind of brutal repressive system at play. But that was true in the Jim Crow South, and people chose things like boycotts. They chose things like direct action that included being arrested and other kinds of nonviolent civil disobedience. So I think people do have choices, and they do have a repertoire of resistance, and it's important that we center their agency. I agree with you 100%. They are subjects, not objects. And that's why, for me, they are the center of the story, not the white press, not the white voters. Those are kind of downstream consequences of what Black activists are doing.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. And then I will, of course, defer back to you, Malaika, because I'm enjoying this exchange a lot. Great. And I also thank you guys for being. I feel like this is cool because it's honest and there's disagreement, but it's not personally attacking or condemning or. I guess I think that there is a difference. And I don't even know if I think I'm agreeing and maybe disagreeing with both of you here, but there is a difference between, the Highlander School, between, very organized trainings and a tactical strategic orientation and what we're seeing now, which is spontaneous. And while I get the issue of agency, if we're going to step back and talk about this from a strategic, tactical perspective, it is very different, right? The way we talk to or about or engage with people who are spontaneously coming together and coming together in a decentralized way versus the way we would talk kind of as organizers or activists on the ground or as people who are advising people on the ground. And then there's the question of how we frame things publicly, how we frame things behind closed doors, how we frame things in the media. And how I don't really know also the way to talk about this in a way that is, I don't know, it's so fraught how we talk about it, because do you need to be does it give you more legitimacy to talk about it when you have one foot in that movement? I certainly don't think you can't talk about it if you don't, but I'm just curious about how that changes the relationship between what people are saying, prescribing, advocating for. Let
me touch on the last thing you were talking about, which echoes an earlier point you made about the language is hard and these conversations are hard. Yeah. One thing I observe is that there's a real discomfort on the left to talk about a just cause for which some of the actions might not produce just consequences. And so that's, I think, some of the blowback to my paper is people are just deeply uncomfortable with even considering that the righteous anger, right, the absolutely legitimate righteous anger that people feel might not produce righteous outcomes. And I think that there's a certain immaturity to that at some level, right? It's like we need to be a movement that sort of says, what works, right? We've got bigger fish to fry here. There are huge issues that need to be addressed of racial inequality, and the inability to sort of to talk in an honest way about consequences of different kinds of tactics is for me a kind of, at some level, magical thinking. People just don't want to consider that, again, a just cause might have might boomerang in ways, right? And so other ways in which this manifests are people are like, well, why are you not talking about white voters more? Why aren't you talking about white media more? It's like, do you think Bayard Rustin or Ella Baker wasn't considering the kind of what they were up against of a media that was ignoring them, of white voters who were indifferent? Like, the reason they chose these tactics was because they were in a society that was 90% white and profoundly segregationist, right? So it's up against those odds that they are engaging in these tactics. And in some of the feedback, not today, people sort of want to kind of decenter the activists the way I see it, but also not consider that different strategies had different kinds of effects. And that's I'm sympathetic to always wanting to sort of say, hey, let us not for a moment leave out of the story the degree to which they are fighting white supremacy, a brutal repressive system. But that doesn't mean every tactic is effective.
Yeah, I think that's of course we can acknowledge that very easily, and I think if Black people who care about social justice and they care about this work knew the answer, we would have been there already. I think we're all trying to experiment. We're doing the research, we're doing the work. We're in different spaces fighting on different fronts. I'm not out there throwing Molotov cocktails for a reason. I think that there are other ways that we can engage in some things that might be more effective than others. And so I think, I don't know how many people necessarily are discounting the idea that righteousness does not, or righteous anger does not produce righteous outcomes. But I think we should also think about the alternative. Righteousness also does not produce righteous outcomes. Martin Luther King was assassinated. We didn't pass the Fair Housing Act, even though it was sitting in Congress for about a year or two. We didn't pass the Fair Housing Act until the week Martin Luther King was assassinated, and there were uprisings. And so I think we're talking about different levels of government. If we're thinking about white public opinion that affects presidential elections, sure, as your research shows, that had serious outcomes where we had Richard Nixon inflict law and order on this country in ways that we're still experiencing right now. But we also have a law and order president that followed a very centrist Black president, and there was backlash to that. So I think we have a perpetuation of kind of systems of oppression that still exist that deserve attention. And I would say the majority of our attention, because white public opinion kind of can go with the breeze. Even in 1964, even with all the peaceful protests, they still said that Black people were getting too many rights and that they were starting to experience reverse discrimination. And so, yes, your piece, I think, your research is valuable work at looking at the efficacy of these nonviolent protests. But I think people are extrapolating a lot more than they should, because there are a lot of different dynamics and factors in play when you look at what's happening on the state level, what's happening on the federal level, what's happening in city councils. Because again, with peaceful protests, Southern states still did not want to concede anything. So sometimes that threat of violence, as we've seen with the FHA, and even violence itself, produces legislative outcomes, if not presidential ones.
So let me pick up on a couple of points. Those are great points, and I really appreciate both Katie and Malaika, the kind of the interventions you're offering. So one, I think
Malaika's much more eloquent than mine, but yeah, I was a little squishy, but yeah.
No, well, there's one thing you said earlier, which I think is a hard one, which echoes something Malaika said, which is, are these things really organized, right? And clearly, like a lot of so I think it's important to note that a lot of protests that escalate to violence often start as nonviolent, and there's sort of and then later turn violent or something like that. So I think there is a way in which there are organizers. These things do sometimes have people who have a long history in community organizing, but it can also spiral out of control in ways that reflect the fact that you're absolutely right. It's not somebody saying let's engage in a Molotov cocktail strategy, but you also see some of the people on this, out on the ground doing things like my wife shared with me a story of somebody who was an organizer at an event where water bottles were being thrown by protesters at police, and this woman who was an organizer goes to the police and says, look, if I get them to stop throwing water bottles, will you back off? Under the condition that if they do it again, you get to arrest me. And and so she basically made herself a hostage to the police to get her side to kind of cool off and for the police to cool off, right? That's a pretty sophisticated maneuver. And that's the kind of thing that, to your point about Highlander, like we need more people to be trained in the kinds of methods that allow protests to be their most effective. We need police to not be, like the police escalation clearly is an issue, but the activists don't control the police. The activists control the activists. And so I want us to think about, well, what is their locus of agency? What are the ways, to your point, we can invest more in organizing and training and getting people the skills so that they can navigate those high conflict moments. And at the same time, the ideas still do matter, right? So like, there were, I don't know whether it's true, but there's been reporting about, I don't know whether the allegations are true, but there's been widespread reporting about 2 lawyers in New York who were engaged in who were caught with a bunch of Molotov cocktail, equipment, right? And at the margins, those are people who could read different ideas and say, oh, like maybe the violent tactics are undermining the cause, and that's so that's the story I'm trying to tell about activists are being influenced by ideas and on the ground are making choices. And then the last thing I want to say, just to underline something Malaika said, which is there is some evidence that violence can be effective, right? So I think there are a couple of things that we should say about that. One is the story I'm telling is fundamentally in a democracy or a semi-democratic society. There has to be a free press to cover what's going on. So if you're like engaging in Jewish resistance to, the Third Reich, like I'm not saying like you should engage in like nonviolent resistance, right? Mandela is arrested as part of a violent resistance movement to apartheid, right? So in the absence of a free press, I think kind of all bets are off. And there's also evidence from other scholars that finds violence. We all find basically that violence helps to draw the media in and get attention. And in some cases that might produce some benefits. So after the LA uprising, there's evidence that an education initiative was supported. Basically, there was a kind of a liberalizing effect of the LA uprising on education policy. We also saw a Republican mayor elected soon thereafter for the first time in 36 years, right? So there can be these complicated effects, some kinds of beneficial carrots and some kind of increased investments in repression, like a 3 strikes you're out law that also passed in California shortly after the LA uprising. So it's not that this is you can reduce the whole thing to a simple story. And the last example I'll give, their scholars, Maria Stephen and Erica Chenoweth, who looked at more than 300 campaigns around the world, and they found that nonviolent campaigns succeeded about 50% of the time, and campaigns that employed violence succeeded about a quarter of the time. So we might say nonviolence in this cross-national analysis was about twice as effective, but that doesn't mean violence was never effective, right? And so I think I want to concede that the 1960s are different, and I want to concede that violence can be effective, but that there is other evidence suggesting these kind of broad patterns also play out outside of the US, and that particularly if you're 10% of the population, you're outnumbered, you're outgunned by a state that will engage in extra-legal repression, like, as Nando said, COINTELPRO, like that's a kind of tough battle to take on, because you're always going to be outgunned.
Yeah. I think about Castro guerrillas in the mountains of Cuba. Like they had a real shot of violently overthrowing the state, or Bolsheviks in Moscow had a real shot like that was a rickety state that didn't have that much power to fight back. And I look at our state and I see like they're watching this video right now, they know what's going on. We have our NSA guy watching the video and reading our texts and stuff. And yeah, so like I just find that I see this a lot of young people, like there's like this thing that we can do something to violently overthrow the state. And it's like, how would they have there's no way we're going to do that.
Yeah. And I think I used to think before I was doing this research that I kind of had this idea of like Martin Luther King was the idealist and Malcolm X was the realist. And as I did the research, I began to think, no, it's actually backwards. Like Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and Bayard Rustin and all of these folks on the work within the system school were operating under an assumption that one of our primary sources of power is moral capital, and if we kind of lean on violent resistance, we've seen what the Klan and the segregationists and the state will do. They even without much provocation, they will engage in assassinations and burning homes and all kinds of other things, right? So they will blow up a church and kill 4 little girls, right? So that's what you're up against, and they were the realists. And in some ways, the kind of Black Power movement and folks like Malcolm X, who said, we are promised equality and we expect the state to fulfill that, we're operating in some ways with a certain kind of idealism that it's true. The Declaration of Independence does say we're all created equal, but it clearly that's not a promise that's being honored. And so what do you do as a realist given that stacked deck?
So someone in the comments said, I think the NSA knows what type of lube I buy because the shop is always running out. So, if they know that.
Always watching.
Yeah, they know.
Always be watching. Always be always. What is it? Closing. Always be closing.
Always be closing. Yeah.
Yeah. I also think that there's and I think not to kind of. Nando and I earlier were kind of talking about this cancel culture-ish thing, this vibe of it's not necessarily, if you say this, you're going to lose your job. But there is I find myself doing this and I hate it. And I'm like, I sound like such a spoiled brat. Woe is me. But I do find myself I think there's an important distinction between a moral argument and an efficacy argument. I also do think that those things are related. And even the way we frame the efficacy argument has moral ramifications. And then adding onto that, even tactically, the way we frame it morally is significant if our point is to get people to listen. Even if we're talking about what we think should or shouldn't be done in protests, right? What's the successful way for someone to communicate that, right? And I do think coming at it from the absence of the context and as you're saying, of course there's white supremacy, of course there's an armed state, of course any resistance is going that's anti-racist is going to be outgunned, outweaponed, whatever. I think that there's it's really complicated because I think that on one hand there's a problematic tendency to moralize, and instead of talking about strategy and tactics, that's kind of infantilizing and condescending. And then on the other hand, there is a kind of blaming that I think makes that other discussion of tactics and strategies much less possible, much harder to have.
Yeah, I mean, the way, one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last month is just how important it is to not just drop into this conversation as an academic, right? And so, if I were having these discussions, with my colleagues, it would not be weird to just kind of go right to here's a finding, here's a result. And I think it's almost like there's a prayer that kind of has to begin every one of these conversations. We're talking about somebody who was murdered, right? We're talking about people who are profoundly angry after years of injustice, right? Decades of injustice. And unless we begin with why people are protesting and why they are angry and why they are escalating in some cases to violent resistance to oppression, we miss, to your point, Katie, the moral core of what's going on. So, I think that is absolutely true. And I'm absolutely guilty at times of not, sometimes I've been in an interview and somebody just goes straight to, so tell me about nonviolence versus violence. And I have to sort of almost say, well, wait, let's.
They don't know that you spent 15 years, busting your ass, getting rejected left and right. And then you finally were able to do it. You're like, all I want to do is talk about the paper. Right. If they knew.
But I've had to make sure I am starting with the emotional center of it. And I agree with you. And I also think it is similarly true, though, that if you the way I think about it is like, it would be inappropriate at a funeral to talk about very pragmatic things, right? Our grandfather's house is going to go for sale. How much money do you think it's going to sell for, right? That's not appropriate at the funeral. But to your
you gotta
point,
talk about food, attendance, all that. Yeah.
but to your point about how moralizing can also constrain a conversation, right? People saying, no, it's not we can't talk about that now. Forever is going to mean that, like, I mean, that's there are ways in which that's a moral cudgel that's been used against me. That it is profoundly immoral to talk about consequences, is something that that somebody wrote, and it's like, well, when do we consider this, right? At what point do we, we've had 50 years of people talking about causes of violent uprisings. Is that enough time, right? Do we need, at what point do we start to think about consequences? And I think there's one other dimension to it, which is, which I don't even fully have my arms around, but nobody is angry at, Chenoweth and Stevens, who do this work on 300 campaigns in other countries, right? It's very hard for us in America to talk about both racism and the idea that the civil rights movement isn't this thing which was kind of like a heroic movement in every aspect, right? And so the complexity of that movement is something that's just very close to home. And what I see is both on the left and the right, a kind of a set of scripts that people lean on. And in some ways, what this paper has kind of done around, to your point about cancel culture, has kind of stirred the pot where it's not telling a story that everybody wants to hear. It's not just a happy ending story, right? Nonviolent protest was very effective. Violent protest had some negative effects, and in that way, I've experienced people sort of trying to draw moral boundaries and say this is unacceptable. And I think and to your point, part of what I'm trying to do is to say, well, let's think about what's the rhetorical maneuver there, and how might we be what to your point about infantilizing, like, what are we saying about Black agency when you say we can't talk about consequences, right? I reject the idea. Sorry, I'm belaboring this point, but if a person can only be a hero in a story, you have narrowed their humanity, right? Like, to be human is to become complicated, and to be fully human is to have flaws, and to also be capable of brilliance, and to be capable of screwing things up, right? And so that to me is a way to center the fullness of Black life and Black humanity in this story, and anything that sort of tries to circumscribe some of the rough bits is to me a kind of soft bigotry that I reject.
On that note, I gotta run to the bathroom, so I'm gonna let you guys chit chat for a second.
Yeah. And Malaika, I definitely want to hear.
Yeah,
your takes on this.
Yeah, you can't really discount what Omar is saying. I think, for the most part, Black people have adopted a nonviolent strategy. The vast majority of Black people have adopted that, and I would just still challenge this idea that, yes, he talked about the fact that violence can be effective in some spaces, but if you look at the overall trends, nonviolence is what is, most effective. And I'm curious as to what we mean by effective. Effective at doing what? What are the actual outcomes that we're looking at? So if we're stopping at white opinion beliefs, and I'm just going by, his data points, if we're stopping at white opinions consider civil rights the most important issue, that's an outcome. If we're talking about Black homeownership, Black wealth, Black police repression, none of that has necessarily been changed in the last 60 years because Black people have been nonviolent. I'm not saying that that is a reason to engage in violent protests, but I think I'm more concerned about, again, the conclusions being drawn by other people who read pieces like this and say, well, violence isn't the answer. Y'all sit down, go home, only strategize, only engage, going inside the halls of City Hall, or only engage by trying to convince white people of your humanity. I'm not saying this is what Omar is doing. I'm talking about how the public interprets information like this. And so if we have the same outcomes by being nonviolent as we did in 1968, then I want us to be able to think about other options, other alternatives. Are we maybe thinking about the threat of violence? So everyone's not necessarily throwing Molotov cocktails. Malcolm X didn't do that. He just threatened it. And so having the threat of somebody like Malcolm X, having the threat of groups like the Black Panthers also did work in getting our legislative halls to say, we don't want that to happen. This exists. We don't want that to happen. So we have to concede to these other demands that are happening with people who are actually trying to meet with us. So I think having multiple strategies instead of, again, I can't discount the rigorous data that Omar has collected. But I do think that history doesn't necessarily comport with the idea that we can only engage in nonviolent strategies. And again, that's not his conclusion, but I think other people would draw that conclusion from it.
So let me pick up on two important points you made, right? So again, I've got one paper. I can't take on everything, but there are two papers that looked at effects on employment in Black communities of the unrest that followed Martin Luther King's assassination. So there are 137 or so violent uprisings in Black communities around the country after King is assassinated. And so there are two economists, Margot and Collins, who looked at effects on housing markets 20 years later and looked at effect on employment markets 20 years later. And they developed the method that I use in this paper of using rainfall as a way to kind of approximate random assignment of violent protests, right? And so places where it rained, there was less likely to be an uprising. Places where it didn't rain, there was more likely. And what they find is that rainfall in April of 1968 is predictive of housing markets and employment 20 years later. And the story is basically that where there was violent unrest, the housing markets are significantly depressed and the employment markets are significantly depressed. So as measured by the welfare of Black people in the terms you just said, right? Employment, housing, what we see is profoundly negative consequences. So that to me is one more really important point, is that these are often people burning their own community in, again, a state of legitimate, understandable rage, but where the long-term consequences are actually, at least the evidence we have so far, can be quite harmful. The second thing that you said was,
the radical flank type of
radical flank, yeah. So I agree that a radical flank almost certainly is helpful. And I just got an email from a professor of African American Studies and Political Science, Professor Nimtz, in Minneapolis, who says, you need to pay more attention to Malcolm X. So I'm gonna go kind of look more at that work. But I think it's important to note that the Black Power movement starts after the Voting Rights Act. The Watts uprising happens after the Voting Rights Act in '65. What we see is that the kind of the more violent resistance that is in the later part of the 1960s comes after the two big successes of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And so it's possible that Malcolm X's rhetoric plays a role, but we don't see evidence of violent tactics on the ground driving public opinion and voting. And I fully concede that protests, another bit of feedback I've gotten, which I would have loved to have spent more time in the paper. I'm working on a book, so hopefully I get to address some of these other concerns in the book. But protests are not everything, right? Organizing can happen without protests. Protests like boycotts, like the Birmingham bus boycott, 381 days of people walking for miles, didn't get a lot of media, but it broke the back of segregation in busing, right? So there are other kinds of resistance that aren't media-centric. There are other kinds of organizing that aren't protest, and those absolutely matter. And to Malaika's point, I agree fully. There are other kinds of outcomes that aren't, electoral. But there was a nice study that I think the larger point here is that politics is fundamentally coalitional if you are 10% of the population. Like, it's really hard to get what you want. I mean, let's look at the recent news, right? The Washington NFL team changing its logo, right? Dan Snyder is its name. Dan Snyder says, I will die before that happens. What caused him to change it? Well, decades of activism by Native Americans and FedEx saying, we're going to pull millions of dollars, right? I was just listening to a great podcast on Radiolab about the flag in Mississippi changing, bringing down the Confederate flag from within their state flag, right? And again, decades of activism by African Americans, and in the coalition, right, the NCAA saying we're not going to send our games there, and Amazon saying we're not going to sell Confederate flags, and suddenly the activists and these like totally boring kind of corporate interests aligned to force change. And so if we think politics is fundamentally coalitional for statistical minorities, if you're not 51% of the population, right, you almost always are having to lean on people who aren't as radical as you. Then whether it's, you know, whatever the organizing is doing, whatever the tactics are doing, like often it's about trying to find allies. And here's where I think, you know, Malaika raises a really good point. Maybe violence is a better tactic, but what scholars like again Maria Chenoweth and Maria Stevens and Erica Chenoweth find is that actually part of the power of nonviolence is you co-opt all of these other potential. You even co-opt the opposition. There are all of these people who are kind of fence sitters watching, and the power of nonviolence gives you legitimacy that kind of brings them into your coalition.
One thing that I would say, and I think, you know, first, again, I reiterate that this is extremely enlightening, and I'm actually I'm pleased that you are spending this time digging so deeply into the work and offering the nuance that I think gets lost. And to be fair, I knew nothing about kind of all the hubbub around the piece and what was going on Twitter. I'm getting into it for the first time recently. And so I really appreciate this. I think this is really helpful. I think this is work. I'm also organizing, and I think this is work that we should all be looking at. I would say just a couple of points that when it comes to what we think about kind of a radical flank, Malcolm X was not the only radical in the 60s, because, you know, around that era, you had Stokely Carmichael, who was pushing Martin Luther King to be further and to adopt the Black Power movement and the Black Power ideology when he was in SNCC. And so they were working together as colleagues. And so Stokely Carmichael was also saying, hey, there are younger people who are saying that we are fed up with, we feel like we're not getting the demands that we're seeking through this civil rights protest. So you had radical elements even then. You had radical elements amongst communists, Black communists and Black socialists in literary spaces and political spaces all over. And so it wasn't just Malcolm X who was providing this kind of alternative to white America. You also had other Black activists, even within the South. There was a Mississippi freedom movement who were armed, deacons of the South, who made sure that civil rights activists were protected. So we've always had radical elements within the Black community, and they were often seen as a threat, as an alternative threat to the white power structure that I think we cannot ignore. And on top of that, if you look at, when I say the outcomes, yes, I'm talking about education, I'm talking about health, I'm talking about housing, but also what are the direct outcomes of the legislation that passed in 1964 and 65? There wasn't any enforcement of it whatsoever. So while the federal government passed it, you still had to have the March on Selma. You still had to have the election of Lyndon B. Johnson in order to move the needle a little bit more to make things happen. You had to have someone who was familiar with the South. You had to have people who were in power, white people in power, to say, we also need to make these things happen. It can't just be Black activists and Black civil rights organizers. And so I think part of the conversation, yes, should be how should Black people think about their strategies? And again, this is not, your piece is not supposed to be talking about this, but I want the larger conversation to be, what should white people also be doing? Because in the South, they controlled it. They ran the state legislatures, they ran the city councils, they ran the police departments. And so as peaceful as we were, unless they also did something about it, we weren't enforcing the civil rights acts of 64 and 65.
I think part of what's helpful about considering those kinds of questions is that we can look at, and this is not my work, but there's research that shows that part of how desegregation, I mean, I think, let me step aside for a second and just sort of say, like, I think one thing that gets lost in some of these debates is how unbelievable it is that the Jim Crow, which was, as Malaika said, was deeply entrenched, right? Every institution in the South was set up to kind of maintain Jim Crow, right? So, and when you read a book, I highly recommend a book called At the Dark End of the Street, which talks about the extensive sexual violence, in particular against Black women, that undergirded a lot of the early civil rights. I mean, the activism of the civil rights movement was in opposition to that. And part of what you hear in the story of the women who were organizing much of the Montgomery bus boycott is every tool of the state was being used to kind of break that, right? So you had people being arrested for totally trivial things. You had people firing their, if you had somebody working in your home, you would fire that person if they were an activist. Police would engage in extra legal repression. The newspapers were aligned with the segregationists, right? And yet, that boycott was effective, right? And that what activists were able to do is often target an institution that had a branch outside of the South and generate make the local controversy one where the branch of Woolworths or whatever it is outside the South is like, this is we need to fix this, right? And they have interests that aren't just Southern and segregationist. So this is all a roundabout way of saying to Malaika's point that it's absolutely true that there were white power brokers who were making really critical decisions. And one thing that's lost in a lot of these conversations is there was heterogeneity among white actors, right? And what that means is there were some people like Bull Connor who were like brutal segregationists, but there were also business leaders who had an interest in trying to maintain peace because that was better for business. And that internal division within the white community could be leveraged by Black activists. It's sort of a trivial example by comparison, but that the NCAA is not bringing its games to Mississippi, or it passes a rule. We're not going to put any conference games in a state that has a Confederate flag in its state flag, which is only Mississippi, right? That act reflects a kind of diversity within white power that can be leveraged in coalition by one group against another. And so you're absolutely right. And I think one other thing that Malaika is saying that I think is really important we should probably consider is, what does this mean now? And I think it's absolutely true that we should be thinking about, what does it mean for white people to be responsible? What does it mean for media to be more responsible? And I'm encouraged cautiously that we do see a growing concern about racial equality, particularly among white liberals, that the media coverage yesterday, front page of the Washington Post is a story about police shooting at a peaceful protester. Today, front page of the New York Times is a hard-hitting piece about the NYPD engaging in excess force. So I'm not saying the media coverage has been uniformly good, but we do see real attention to the underlying injustices. And that to me reflects a real success of Black Lives Matter in this moment. And also the media behaving in a more responsible way.
I'm curious about the turn that you described towards violence in the late 60s, coming off the back of victories. Why did that happen? I don't understand why.
It's a great question. I mean, it's one of the big puzzles of social science, and people have been studying it for decades. I mean, I think there are a bunch of things going on simultaneously. So in the context of my work, one thing I'm underlining is, something that Malaika mentioned earlier, which is there are folks like Stokely Carmichael who really turn from being very deeply embedded in the nonviolent direct action school to being more, becoming public advocates of violence in self-defense, right? So, and it's not just Stokely Carmichael or Malcolm X, as Malaika said, right? There are folks like Angela Davis who are saying, right, I knew some of those girls who were bombed in Birmingham, and I think this commitment to nonviolence it reflects, when people talk about violence, they're not talking about the history of violence that goes back to people being pulled off the shores of Africa and enslaved, right? And so the kind of rhetoric among a younger generation of African-American leaders was much more supportive of violent resistance. So that's, I think, one factor. There's a kind of just a cultural shift. Malaika also brought up a good point, and Katie echoed this too, which is the earlier period is much more organized, coming out of church leaders and other kinds of union movements, and that organization it allows people know each other. It's like a different context. As things move to the north and to a period, particularly, take an event like King being assassinated. These are spontaneous, and people are in a state of, again, legitimate rage, right? So in those moments, it's just much harder to have a kind of organized protest. But again, I still think we want to think about, would it be possible for people to have had a nonviolent protest after King is assassinated? Certainly, right? It's rage doesn't mean you have to escalate to violence. And then there are a couple of other things, and this is, again, it's not well understood, but I think some of what's going on in the change is that people are seeing their brethren being brutalized on TV, and in some ways embedded in the seeds of really effective nonviolent civil disobedience, exposed to brutal repression, is in some ways the seeds of its downfall, which is it's exceedingly hard to sustain that, because if I see you, Nando, and I think of you as my kin, and you're getting brutalized, then I get motivated.
I hope you would pick up a rifle and start, shooting. Man.
Yeah. And so I think
we were on the Katie Halper show together. This is a lifelong bond now.
Yeah. And so I think, it part of what made it effective was also part of what lit the, or kind of made the larger Black community a kind of kindling for more aggressive resistance. It's just, it's really hard. Let me go on a weird analogy here, which is in the film Moonlight, there's a scene where the young man has been bullied, and he at a certain point, I think it's been enough years that this is not I'm not giving too much away, right? He attacks his bully, and it's not just that he's an eye in that case. Yeah, he's got to do that to protect himself, right? If he doesn't, and so I think if you see your kin being brutalized, if you feel some empathy for them, it's hard not to be moved to respond potentially in kind. And also to think that if we don't escalate, right, we may be the targets of even more repression.
I want to, if we have time, I know we've been talking.
I forgot.
I want to hypothesize something too to Nando, because I've been looking at kind of these comparisons to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, kind of independently of this conversation. And I would really recommend a book called Martin and Malcolm in America by Dr. James Cone. He is one of the co-founders of Black Liberation Theology, and he kind of looks at the transition of Christianity from something that's rooted in Eurocentrism to something that is used by Black Christians to think about their liberation and social justice movements in America during the Black Power struggle. And so what he kind of draws out in this book is how Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, because we're kind of using those two as our tent poles here, they differed in part because of their geography. And so Martin Luther King was in a region where, even though you had this intense threat of racial violence, people were more segregated. And so you did not necessarily, you experienced it on certain levels, but you still went to Black churches, you went to Black schools, you went to Black pools, your social network.
Where Joe Biden was a lifeguard, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, does Delaware count? But you were in very segregated environments. And so you kind of had a bit of safety and protection being in these Black communities. And so there, in a way, he's arguing that there's a little bit of being divorced from certain elements of white culture where you can be peaceful in some ways. I'm not, that's just kind of one argument to it. But people like Malcolm X, who were raised in integrated environments, they were raised seeing that this nonviolent protest and integrating is not necessarily the solution, because I'm still being called an N-word. I'm still experiencing police repression. You have histories of police repression in places where Black migrants move from the South to the North and the West. You have histories of police departments turning their tactics to be more repressive and involve more surveillance. And so where you see a lot of these uprisings, they were in these industrial towns. They weren't in the South. They were in Watts. They were in Newark. They were in Minnesota. They were in St. Louis. They were in Detroit. So these are places where Black people have said, we've tried this tactic. Our parents, our grandparents tried this tactic of nonviolence. We're still experiencing the same repression in the North. Something has to give. And so that turn to escalation and frustration is born out of, white communities leaving when their families decided to integrate, leaving when they said we want to share in this American dream together, and they were left literally with no tax base. And so you have a decline in the economic base, which we know also leads to violence. Just thinking outside of civil rights movements, just for anybody, if you don't have social services, if you don't have money, you're going to be frustrated. And so I think we have to think about kind of the geography here and the role of the Great Migration in radicalizing people. And these are very real outcomes that people are experiencing. And I think we have to focus on that phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, before I know, Malaika, I would love to speaking of geography. Malaika is not just a journalist, and I mentioned she's a filmmaker, and she's also a jurist. I don't know if being a lawyer technically counts.
She's a judge?
No,
I'm a public policy attorney. I have way too many hats, and so I study public policy and write public policy for a living. So I have to say,
which is why you noticed that high nerd quotement here on tonight's show.
I mean, me and Katie are just fucking loser talking heads.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, seriously. But I wanted to, speaking of geography, I mean, I don't know if you hear it. So Malaika, you are from Atlanta. I hear the Southern drawl. And one of the most,
I'm from Miami. I'm from the South too.
Yeah, right. You can same thing, right? Yeah. One of a really influential piece that Malaika wrote for Current Affairs called "The Color of Economic Anxiety." You turn that, which looks at the Midwest. You also turned that into a film called Left Out. And I wanted to just give people a chance to watch a part, some of it. Is there a clip that we can show that's particularly, you think, useful or relevant for this discussion? I mean, the whole thing, it's really great. It's a 7-minute film as of now, right, on YouTube?
It is. It's a little bit under 8 minutes, like 7 minutes, 58 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't give you a time stamp.
But like a section of it?
Yeah, but there's a section where I look at the inequalities in the Midwest, and I contrast that with the non-peaceful protests that happened in 2016 with the killing of Sybil Smith. I don't know precisely at what point that is.
I know where it is. Milwaukee on Edge, that part?
It's after yes.
Okay.
As the caption, August 2016.
Let me see. Okay, yeah. I'm going to show 3 months before the presidential election. Is that before that or after that?
It's that.
It's that. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so let's just. Can we watch this together, guys?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Thank you, guys. I feel like this is a sleep-in. How long are we going to?
Oh, I know. No, yeah. I mean, I have whatever. Nando's on the West Coast, so he's got hours left for his day wraps up. I'm just kidding. But let me. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So this is you may recognize the woman on the right.
She looks familiar.
Oops.
Has become synonymous with white. But assuming the region
Let me
after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
The Midwest, like the working class, has become synonymous with white. But assuming the region mostly has conservatives who need to be won over has serious political implications.
A community on edge. Overnight, a crackdown to stop the raging protests against police. The neighborhood that was set on fire closing from dusk till dawn under a strictly enforced curfew.
This will happen because they're not helping the black community. Like, the rich people, they got all this money.
This entire community has sat back and witnessed how Milwaukee, Wisconsin has become the worst place to live for African Americans in the entire country. Now, this is the warning cry. Where do we go from here? Where do we go as a community from here? Do we continue with the inequities, the injustice, the unemployment, the undereducation that creates these byproducts that we see this evening? Do we continue that?
Why didn't you vote in 2016?
Because the candidates that were running, they weren't in tune with the poor people, the people in the poor communities, and they weren't too much of paying attention to the problems that we were having or how the laws were affecting us.
What were some of the issues that you're saying poor people in Milwaukee were dealing with?
Cost of living first, it actually went up. The wages, the working wages here, the pay is nothing, and the cost of living is going up. So I mean, like, we should have an increase in pay
this was again a middle class, solid middle class neighborhood. There were businesses all up and down.
When it did become predominantly a black neighborhood, this company was still thriving, and this community was still thriving.
Right.
Should we stop there? I mean, is there?
Yeah, this segment. I think it's like 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah.
The lawns were immaculate, houses well taken care of.
Owner occupied.
When some of the older generation that worked here passed on, they passed these houses on to their children, and many of them were lost because the children could not afford to keep the taxes up because they didn't have self-sustaining jobs that would allow them.
Manufacturing jobs abandoned Milwaukee's city center for over 40 years, leaving behind a 45% black male employment rate, the lowest of any major city in the country. But the narrative is that moderate voters would feel abandoned with basic social programs. How do other Democrats feel?
Free healthcare. Does that make you feel abandoned?
Yeah.
You know, that makes me think, like, you know, in terms of watching those people in the video, it makes me think of, like, you know, we've made all this progress against sort of de jure cultural racism. Like, there's, you know, you can't get away with saying, I don't know, something horribly racist anymore, right? Which is, you know, progress in terms of that. But, like, you see these older black people talking about, like, what this neighborhood used to be like, you know, and you look at that decline in the manufacturing base and you know, the social services cut from austerity and all that stuff, and, like, it seems like there's progress on one level, and you know what I'm talking about? It's going like this, you know, and it's just, you know, it's hard to think for people, like, whether things are getting better or not. And it's like they're getting better in some ways, but they're way worse in other ways.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even have a question. It's just kind of like I think reflection to that video.
I think that's exactly right. I think of it as a tale of two cities in Black America, that there's a Black middle class that has done reasonably well in the post-civil rights era. You know, we see growing education levels, we see growing numbers of folks finishing college, we see, you know, in kind of, you know, in corporate America, more progress of people getting employed. And for the bottom half, you know, for the Black working class, things by a whole bunch of measures have gotten worse. Right. So, I mean, incarceration, you know, front and center, criminal justice system has become way more intrusive in Black life. And things like what Malaika was just documenting so powerfully, right? Deindustrialization hit the Black community. You know, it part of what she's showing there is that what happened to the Black community was a kind of leading indicator for what was going to happen to working class and white America. It just hit Black America. Black America was the canary in the coal mine.
Exactly right.
Right. And I think our challenge, I think Omar and I both agree with the problem. This is a problem. But the issue is, what do we do about it? And he's done the research, and I fully admired that kind of commitment. He said 14 years.
And I'm getting rejected, right? And, like, turned down.
Yeah. And
I was such a fear for rejection. I would have just thrown the papers up in the air.
Yeah.
And I believe more of us, there should be more research like that, and more people committed to that. I think it has very important conclusions and important inferences that organizers, Black people, anyone who cares about justice should be thinking about and talking about. I think we also need more to look at other trends, to look at the influence of, like, the threats of violence and how impactful or not that might be. To look at how we've maintained, even though Black people as a whole, as I've said, have been nonviolent, and we're still facing these outcomes, to make sure that we're still kind of expanding our scope to think about capitalism and deindustrialization, all these other things that are keeping Black people repressed.
I agree fully. And I think one other really important point that is sort of lost in some of the nonviolent, violent discussion in the paper, and this echoes a point Malaika just made, is in political science, and this is a little bit of an inside baseball discussion, but it's important to flag that there's a lot of evidence that elites dominate politics. And so part of my intervention with this paper is to say, yeah, they may dominate politics, but not totally. right? And it is possible for there to be bottom-up effects on politics, and protests are one of the ways that that can happen. And I think it can be too kind of demobilizing to just tell a story about, elites dominate, whether it's in political science or in a story about, the society is rigged against you. Clearly, yes, there's lots of ways in which society is rigged, but you don't want to emphasize that to the point where, again, people have no sense of a capacity, no sense of efficacy, no sense of capacity to make change. And so part of what I hope comes through in the paper is that, in fact, elites may dominate, but it is possible for people at the margins to punch through, particularly when they mobilize and are able to capture, things like the media or other kinds of ally institutions.
Yeah. And I want to thank both of you guys. Nando, hi, bye, whatever. We don't thank you.
Whatever.
No, but yeah, really, for both of you guys.
This is fascinating. I was like,
and
this.
Malaika's piece.
I was like,
I know. And it was really good. And Malaika, her piece is so good. And it really looks at, like, everyone should watch that clip, the film, and it opens up with talking about how, Black people are presented as this monolith of centrists, kind of moderates who you can't alienate with radical economic programs. And it's a really interesting, and one of the men you interview earlier on talks about how there was a DSA person, I think, or a socialist elected there before.
Yeah, he's on the school board. He was a Black man a retired union worker who was mentored by one of Milwaukee's many socialist mayors. And so there's this kind of radical history in the Midwest as well, including among Black people. That gets ignored. And if you want to see the film and support a good cause, it was selected for the Pinwheel Black Voices Film Festival, which is this weekend. I don't know, maybe y'all could put a link. Can y'all drop a link?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll send it to you.
All right, cool.
Put it in the email chat.
Right in the email chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah, this is great. And
if Twitter ever lets me tweet again.
Oh no, we can. I remember I tweeted at the beginning of the show. Yeah. Right. I'll stay on also to take questions and stuff from viewers, but definitely want to liberate everyone. And thank you guys so much. Any final things you want to make sure people know about, like plugs, websites, Twitter, events, upcoming things?
Just want to say thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I'm very grateful to Malaika for asking such thoughtful questions, and Katie and Nando also really thoughtful, feedback and probing. So just grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So much. That was great. Wow, that was so great. It was so great, right?
Yeah, it was fun. It was interesting.
It was interesting. Yeah, I learned a lot. I laughed a little. I didn't cry, but we're getting towards the. No, it was so interesting, and I was really relieved that there was so much, not to sound whatever, but civility. Because it gets annoying with the condemnations and the
Well, I mean, I think when people have to stare at each other in the face, it takes a certain kind of person to be a dick to someone in person.
That's why I gotta have Barry Weiss on. See if maybe the
see if you guys are be best friends.
Yeah, and by the way, it's bullshit. That's a gender issue. It's not. But yeah.
Agreed. All right. Well, I gotta run.
All right, I'll stay on and take some questions because it's the least I could do after Nando shouldered the burden. So everyone will be back. I'll be back on Sunday evening, and then Nando it'll be back next Wednesday. And there's another. We're figuring out the time, but around 8 or 9.
Yeah.
All right.
All righty.
Bye, Nando. Laters. That was great. Okay, so now let's see. Hey, Katie Halbert, didn't you call for people that signed the letter that cancel people to cancel themselves? I kind of did. Let's see. I'm just trying to look for this stuff. Sorry. Also, the issue is you may have noticed my different room. I'm fixing the Wi-Fi. Really, by the way, recommend Malaika's stuff. Let's see. Any super chats? It's okay if there are not any super chats. I will read questions from people who don't pay. I'm just trying to figure out where to start. Let's see. Where are we? I'll show these to Malaika. I'm from the north side of Milwaukee, and it was a vital economic community at one time. No, actually, you know what happened in Milwaukee is that the Russians, I believe. Oh, thank you. Okay. Fascism is colonial crimes applied internally. What America is doing abroad is now happening more starkly here at home. It's all connected. You know who made that point was Matt Christman, but I'm sure other people have made it. I'm just curious if you, Adasia Domingo, and is that how you pronounce it, Adasia? Because I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm curious if that's how, if you heard it, where you heard that, or maybe you thought of it on your own. That sounds so condescending. But did you hear? I'm curious how common an analysis that is. It made me think immediately of Matt Christman, but I'm just curious. Why don't I post more on Twitter? Are you kidding? Me? Post what? You mean like? Okay, Jada. Okay. Why don't I post more on Twitter? I think I tweet a lot. Oh, interesting. Okay, Brad, born and raised in Milwaukee. It definitely is a Russian bot's fault / laughing to keep from crying. Yeah, you know, Margaret Kimberly is great on that stuff. I've had it on the show. It wasn't the Russians. Are you sure? Oh, Vijay Prashad. Okay, yeah. Interesting. Maybe I should have why don't I post more on Twitter? I mean, I think I tweet a lot. Maybe that's sarcastic, but I haven't been tweeting as much as I usually do. I'm actually trying to figure out a good way to like turn some of the, do something with Twitter and video. One of the issues is right now I came into this room with different Wi-Fi sitch, and so I have this very uncomfortable thing where I'm like that because I have to set up my keyboard and the mouse. This is really quite interesting. If the economy implodes, there will be violence. Yes, I would say if the economy implodes, there will be more violence. Okay, I sent a super chat earlier, but you missed it. Okay, what is it? Do you have to click on the super chat? Mr. Domingo is always super chatting, by the way, Katie. So does that mean I'm missing it? Why don't you post more on Twitter? I saw that again. I mean, I saw it before. Oh, okay. Here we go. Oh, wait. That's the fascism thing. We saw that. Let's see. By the way, would you guys like more frequent lives? Like, what's a good time to live stream? Do you think daytime would be good? Do you like the nighttime thing? Is there a time where there's no other shows? Poverty is indeed violence. Yeah. I agree. I got to admit, though, like, austerity is indeed violence. Brad has been largely abstaining from Twitter. I go on for a few minutes, read what the chuds or donuts are saying, and feel my blood pressure skyrocket. That's not good. Nighttime because you work full time. Okay. And what about like should like what's the? Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of doing trying to figure out if I should do like more frequent short things. I kind of like these long things though. Maybe I do both, like a little combo. What do we got here? The CIA built a coalition with Italian fascists, the Catholic Church, and the Corsican Mafia, another small mafia faction in Italy, to undermine revolutionary movements worldwide. Corsica, they don't get talked about enough, that country. Corsica and Malta, no one ever talks about them. Okay, what else? Anything else? Any other questions? Any other guests you'd like to see on the show? Yeah, let me know. Today was a little bit, I felt like a little bit off, but then it was great. It was totally great. I thought it was a great chat. I think I'm going to start, I want to start doing like the personal, like more personal interviews with people. What do you think? Be good, right? Like, I really want to ask Omar more about his story, and like, he comes from a very interesting family. I believe he is a mathematician in the family. He's of the bluish persuasion, Black and Jewish. We didn't get to the David Shore thing, but we can get to that another time. I don't know. I thought this was a great chat. Any other questions? I mean, I feel like I should see. This is that annoying thing I was talking about, where it's hard for me to I don't have my keyboard set up well. Actually, maybe I do, but it's like I gotta get my desk set up. I really don't understand why Wi-Fi is so incredibly hard to do. Oh, Palestine is trending. Hello. Why? Palestine is no longer placed according to Google. Whoa. What's going on with Palestine trending? It's been removed off all maps. Wow. Jeez Louise. Well, we got to cancel Carrie Nelson more than ever. Whoa. It's legit canceled? No wonder they took the blue checks off. I'm just kidding. I don't actually think that they were worried that. Wow. Palestine is trending. Wow. Trump failed America. Yep. I don't know who Elena Deli Donnie is. Basketball person. What else? I feel so free that I can tweet again. That was a great show. Yeah, today's show was a little bit less formal than usual, and that's okay. I thought it was a great show. It was a very good show, by the way. I don't think Omar was saying black people acceptable to white people. What? Fuck cancel culture if it canceled Palestine. Jews were trending today and yesterday, now Palestine. Yeah, Jews were trending like, when were they? Some basketball player or football player said some stuff about Jews. That was interesting. I may get canceled this week, by the way. You haven't seen not over this, over Useful Idiots. We'll see. I think I'm already canceled by many people for that show anyway. What else? Yeah, make sure that you subscribe. If you can, become Patreon supporters, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Although I have to be honest, I have to figure out what a good way to make this Patreon, make the video Patreon content, make video content Patreon only, because it works for the podcast. I release like these things. Not all of it gets released on the regular podcast. Some of it's Patreon only podcast. But what do video people want? What makes video people tick? All right, let's see. I thought I would. I kind of like, sometimes I like doing the really long things. Hold on, let me just say something. I'm trying to see if I can get another guest. That thing I did with Anya was pretty good. I mean, I could also just end this and then I could go edit the Anya clip that I did from a while ago. Let's see. Hold on one second. Debates are great. I know debates are really good. Interview Gloria LaRiva. Okay. The long videos can be released as Patreon, maybe. The long videos released as Patreon. Oh, like a long, right. That's a, maybe. Yeah. So you mean I release clips? Right. That's a good idea. Yeah. I'm still playing around with all of that stuff. Debates are great. We had a spontaneous debate last week. Who else would you guys like to see debate each other? Let me know. Let's see. All right. I think let's leave this to Sunday. Should we pause this and chat on Sunday? You're dumb. How about an oppositional Nathan Robinson versus Julian Assange? I would love to have Julian Assange on. At least 10-minute clips for YouTube recommendations. Yeah, I think so. You're saying you think that 10-minute clips are, yeah, I agree that's a oppositional interview. I'm bad at those, honestly, because I'm good at them on like Fox News. Like I've done that on Fox News, but I feel weird about doing it on my show. I would do it on someone else's show. What else? What is going on with Amy Therese? I don't even want to pay attention to that. Well, Nathan Robinson versus Crystal Ball, Glenn Greenwald already did that. So, I don't want to be derivative. Anything else? At least 10-minute clips for YouTube recommendations. That's your recommendation, CC? I don't understand the syntax of this. I just want at least 10-minute clips for YouTube recommendations. What do you mean? Yeah, I would like to do I'll have some of them on. See, but okay, Sagar and Jetty sucks. Okay, I disagree with him on a lot of things, but I think that, well, first of all, I go on The Hill. I go on Rising. Yeah, I want to have Richard Wolff on. Who else should I have on? Should I tell you some future guests so you can are you guys all subscribers? Do you get notifications? Because here are some future guests. I'm not going to say when, but we got Tim Black. We got Marianne Williamson. We got who else do we got coming up on the pike? Brianna Joy Gray, Matt Karp to talk about something else. The YouTube algorithm prioritizes 10-minute clips. Okay, cool. Yeah, Cece, if you're on Twitter, DM me. Stephanie Kelton versus Richard Wolff. Yeah, I actually want to I want to squash some beef with people. I mean, I want people to squash beef on my show. I'm going to start doing that. In fact, let me write this. I'm going to do that. What else? Anything else? Tim. Yeah, Tim's coming. You didn't get a notice today. Okay, why is that? Nathan Tankus and Rohan Gray. Yeah, I know Nathan, actually. I'll get him on. I don't know who Rohan Gray is. Why didn't you get a notification? Why didn't you get a notice today? Did I post a lot of videos today? Let me see. I'm on the pursuit of happiness. Jesus. Okay, let's see. Why am I singing that song? Yeah, why didn't you get I don't know. Yeah, that was the only one today. Was it not added to your does it need to be added to the whoops. Does it need to be added to a playlist? I have no idea how any of this works. Let's see. Let me see. Tell me if it gets added now. That was a great debate, though. Okay. I saw it coming up in my front page about 2 hours early and had to click receive notification. I don't know what that means, but it doesn't sound good. Squad member interviews would boost. You mean like AOC? We're carrying signs now. It was rescheduled due to. Oh, notice worked for you. Okay. Squad member interviews. You mean AOC and Tlaib and stuff? Rashida. I would love to have Rashida on. We interviewed her on Useful Idiots, but interesting. You got a notification. Talk to the Surfs channel. I don't know what that means. Just DM me, I guess. I mean, Surf channel is someone here, right? I'm so bad at all of this tech stuff. Talk to the Surfs channel. I gotta have a newsletter. How can I get people to give me their emails? That sounds weird, but yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, I really want to have Richard Wolff on. I'm gonna email him. Who else am I gonna have on? You're gonna see. There are gonna be some good books. Are you guys excited though about Tim Black and Marianne Williamson? Those are both good guests, right? All right, cool. I don't know. Where does Fredo live? I don't think that he doesn't. He live in the Hamptons. They don't live there now. Oh yeah. All right. Anyway. All right. I think this has been a good show. I think we learned a lot, and I think it's time to end. And I will see you Sunday. And yeah, I'll see you then. And make sure you, I don't know, I guess like if you want to contact me, write something in, I'm so bad at this, write something in response to my tweets about this, and then I'll DM you or something. Okay. Oh, guys, remember patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. I should make like an annoying banner with that. Okay. Bye. Oh, Boots Riley. I want to have Boots Riley on. How do someone hook it up? Yeah, Sunday. I do my shows on, Sunday. Thanks. That's so nice. Yeah, Katie, if we're not talking about canceling the first pass the post-electoral system, then we're not serious about anything else we're talking about. Oops. Yeah. Katie, if we're not talking about canceling the first pass the post-electoral system, then we're not serious about anything else we're talking about. Okay. Oh, I'll do that. We're a bunch of, now this is good. Okay. We're a bunch of frauds. We're not serious about any of the changes we say we want. Araya, I don't know how to pronounce your first name, but it's not the I guess where you're where you're coming from, a locally famous injury lawyer, and I like that. Tweet the Surfs, look him up. They want a network. Okay, great. Tweet the Surfs. Tweet the Surfs. Like I go in and I put in. Listen to this. The Surfs. Is this a person? Is their name the Surfs? Is it a Cincinnati Celtic band? You guys have to like break this down very Tweet the Surfs. What is Tweet the Surfs? That sounds like Own the Libs. What's Tweet the Surfs? Tweet the Surfs. Are they just named the Surfs? No, I looked for that. The Surfs. Two indentured plebs give you their spin on pale blue dot. He, him. I don't know what's going on. Okay. Anyway, it's been great. DM me or something. Tweet the Surfs. Look him up. I don't know what that means. Tweet the Surfs. All right. I gotta go play with little Bobo. Oh, I see this. Oh, okay. I'm following. Okay. Wow. Guess what? The Surfs is not following me back. So I don't know what to do about that. Maybe you guys should use your voices to get the Surfs to follow me, because I'm following them. Oh, it was two indentured plebs. All right. I don't know what to say. I feel very jilted. I'm following Tweet the Surfs. They're not following me. All right. Bye, everyone.